Okay, and I like to start with a quote. Well, this is the quote. It is just within this fathom-long body, with its perception and intellect, that I declare that there is the world, the origination of the world, the cessation of the world, and the path of practice leading to the cessation of the world. Now, this is a big statement, from the Buddha. It says within this 6 fathom long body, within this 6 feet of body, there is the world, the origination of the world, the cessation of the world, and the path of practice leading to the cessation of the world. So I'm going to explain uh, why this is so. Well, the first thing we want to talk about the reason why the Buddha teaches his Dhamma. What is his purpose? Right? The purpose lies in the Four Noble Truths. It is about the human condition, that there is suffering, there is the cause of suffering, there is an end to suffering, and there is a path to the end of suffering. Now, it is about our human condition. It is about us living in this world. When we live in this world, what we want to avoid is suffering. And it's not something that anybody likes. So the first thing is to realize that there is suffering in this world. You know, when we don't see the suffering is in this world, it doesn't mean that there is no suffering. We are escaping. We avoid seeing suffering. And when we come to realize that there is suffering, we know that there is a cause. For those of us who are suffering and do not find a solution to the suffering, it is because we do not know what the real cause of suffering is. After we know the cause of suffering, there is an end of suffering. And there is a path to the end of suffering. Now, when we come to talk about the end of suffering, it can be at many levels. For some of us, you just want some freedom. For some, we want wisdom. For some, we want the end of rebirth. So there are many levels, when we come to practice. So what the Buddha teaches is about the end of suffering. Now, the first thing we have to realize is that there are two kinds of truth in this world. One is called the conventional truth. This conventional truth is a truth we hold on to by convention, which means that we all drive on the left side of the road. Right? That is a convention. There are certain things called a dishcloth, you know, and there is a hand towel, right? Those are conventions, In reality, you can say that, well, there is no difference between a dish towel and a hand towel, right? For some of us, but you got to respect this convention, when you go into somebody's kitchen, If you don't do that, people will get annoyed or angry. So all this conventional reality we have to follow. They are real. We live in this world with this conventional reality so that we can live in harmony. Right? We respect people's convention. So this is something that we have to understand. So when we are relating to other people, we relate with this conventional reality. But there is the other side of the reality, which is called absolute reality, right? When we talk about absolute reality in Buddhism, the absolute reality is as close as possible to the world, right? It is not a definition of the world, right? It is as close a definition of the world that we can get. But the object of this definition is to help us to end suffering, to reduce suffering. That's the purpose. Right? So what we're going to talk tonight is about absolute reality. Now, how did the Buddha define the world? Right? He just says the world can be considered as consisting of the 5 aggregates. That's all. 5 aggregates. We use these 5 aggregates, right? Understand them, use them to be able to end our suffering. Right? The 5 aggregates in the Pali name is Rupa. Rupa means material form. Right? Vedana, feeling. Sanya is perception. Sankhara is mental formation. And Vijnana is consciousness. Right. So in this Rupa, which is material form, right? So we have 5 categories, right? So in this material form, during the time of the Buddha, they say the material form is made up of the earth element, the fire element, water element, and the air elements. So what they're trying to say is that whatever material form you have, whether it's a desk, a piece of iron or whatever, you can break them down into these 4 elements. But now we know, we don't have to see material form as elements. We can see them as made up of molecules, right? Now, the whole purpose is for us to break down materials into smaller parts. So when we examine material form, we want to know what part is an absolute reality and what part doesn't make up absolute reality. Now, say, for example, a car, a car is when you take parts of the car and made it up, a wing mirror, steering wheel, a wheel, a car body, bonnet, and everything. Then you assemble them. Then you call it a car. So the car is a concept, right? A concept. The parts all together make up a concept of a car. All these parts come together, become a concept of a truck or a tractor or even an aeroplane, right? So all these are made up of parts, right? So the human body as well is made up of parts, you know. So the Buddha says, well, he says that we are made up of 32 parts, definitely more than 32 parts, but he specified 32 parts, of the body. He wants us to see that there are parts of our body. The body is just a concept, right? So as far as we examine the material form rupa, right? We want to know it is just material form made up of parts, and that parts can be divided into smaller parts. So in the end, everything is made up of molecules. Simple as that. And the first thing to understand about Buddhism is that it comes out from the Buddha's contemplation of his own body and his own mind. It is not something that's revealed by an outside agent. It is something that he observed in himself. He contemplated. He finds the cause in it. And he finds what is the solution to suffering. Right. So what the object he's looking at is the body and the mind. That's all. So when we come to study Buddhism, we read about the Four Noble Truths, dependent origination, all that. Right? All these ideas, right? These are ideas. These are definitions, right? But what we should actually be looking at is the way the Buddha had looked at that is within himself, that is innate Dhamma, which is innate phenomena, things that exist within this body and within this mind, things that arise in this body, in this mind. So we have a direct experience, a direct knowledge of it, not through definitions. When we come to, of course, in the beginning, we have to study a little bit about Buddhism to know its structure, right? To know what is taught, what we have to look at. So the first thing I'm talking about is these 5 aggregates. So when we think about the 5 aggregates, we want to be looking within our body, within our mind. You may find in the scriptures, in the suttas, about what feeling is, what perception is, what mental fabrication is, what consciousness is. right? Those are definitions. You read that, you got an idea about it. And that's all you have, right? So tonight you want to see what the Buddha taught us in a different way. We want to directly experience the Dhamma exactly the way the Buddha sees it. So when we come to the second aggregate, Vedana, which is feelings, right? So what is feeling? The simple answer is that which you feel is feeling. What are you feeling now? Right? Doubtful, quietude. So that is feeling. So every time when we talk about feeling, we want to look within, if you like, the heart area. I'm not talking about the physical heart, the heart area, right? What feeling arises in us? So we know this feeling directly. Is it a feeling of calmness? Or it's a feeling of anger? Or is it a feeling of confusion? Right? So that's all you need to know. Right? That which you feel is feeling. Next one I'm going to talk about is sankhara. Sankhara is the way it translated is mental fabrication or mental formation. Simple word for it is just thoughts and views. Okay, sankhara. So that which you think is thoughts, right? So it's as simple as that. Everything that you think is thought. Everything that you judge is a view. Everything that you express is a view. Okay? Now, when we look at these five khandhas, all these five khandhas are things, are nouns, like rupa, material form is a noun. Vedana, feeling is a noun. It's something that exists. Sanya, perception, right? Which I will call mental identity. I'll explain that later. Mental identity or memories, right? That is a noun, right? Sankhara, thoughts and views. That is a noun, right? Consciousness, I'll explain later. Now, we are not talking about verbs. Thinking is a verb. Feeling is a verb, right? Seeing is a verb, right? We are not talking about that. We are talking about objects because it is object that is causing us problems. It is our thoughts. It is our views that are causing us problems. So we have to pay attention to the thoughts that we arrive at, to the views that we hold. The thinking is the process, right? Feelings, the feeling in itself, the feeling of hate, the feeling of jealousy, right? And whatever feeling of anger, whatever feeling, right? So we have to stay with the object, right? Most of us are worried about thinking. I can't stop my thinking, right? But the thing is, the thinking is caused by an object, and that object is a feeling of worry. It is a feeling, right, which causes all this. So we have to examine rupa, the body. We have to contemplate feeling, whatever feeling that arises in us. We can have a feeling that arises in us. We do not necessarily have to have a label for it. We want to know what it does to our body and our mind. Right? So we can always say that the feelings arises in the heart. Thoughts arises in the mind. We're using everyday language, right? Something we know. Now I come to perception, sanya, memories or mental identity, right? What I call mental identity. The first time we come to see something new, we do not know what it is. We see it, we see its color, we see its shape. Then we get some information of it, right? So with this information, we build up a picture within our mind, an image, right? An image similar to what we have seen. So we have what they call a mental identity in our mind of the thing that we first encounter. So we know, okay, this is of this shape, of this texture, right? Of this color. And this is probably what its functions are. So the next time when we see this thing again, we can identify it, right? So we say, oh yes, this is something I've come across. This is what it is. Okay, as soon as we identify something with the mental identity that we have, we are no longer seeing the thing. We are seeing our own mental identity of the thing. We create mental identities in our mind, not only of visual things, right? We create mental identities of sounds that we have, right? But listening, some of us, will create mental identities of different birds chirping. We can identify. We don't have to, right? But it's something that happens regularly with us. We form a mental identity of it. We listen to part of a song. We can identify what song it is. We smell something. We can identify what it is. We taste something, we can identify what it is because we have all this mental identity within us that we keep. The problem with mental identities is that they are constructed by our mind. We create this thing. It is not a true representation of what the thing is outside there. It may or may not be. This mental identity that we have is as good as the information that we get from it. That's about it. We may get our information from gossips of a person. We see a person, then we judge the person. We add our judgments. We add the gossips. And then we have a mental identity of a person. And that stays with us. So that's why, people say first impression is important. Because the first impression is your first mental identity of the person. So when you see the person again, you project this mental identity of the person. You don't see the person, but you see your own mental identity. Mental identity can change, can be updated. Right? You may know that your own parents have their own mental identity of you, which is different from your own mental identity of yourself, which is different from the mental identity your friends have of you. Your colleagues have a different mental identity of you. We all create mental identities of things we know in this world. So in this world, we only see our mental identity. So you can say the world is within this body. Right? Dependent on the perceptions and the intellect. So we create the world within ourselves and then project it out onto the physical world. So each of us have our own world. Our own world, most of the time, do not coincide. That's where we have problems. Like we have to compromise. So we don't, when you come to understand this mental identity, this perception that we have, then we can understand why we all have different perceptions of things. Because we create our own perception depending on our own conditioning, depending on our own likes and dislikes, dependent on our own views on things. So that's the most important part. Perception, mental identities. So this is the origination of the world. So the way to end the world is to understand, first of all, these mental identities that we have. We can create a mental identity so that we can live in a happy world. Or we can create mental identities that we live in a paranoid world. It has nothing to do with the world, external world. It has to do with how we create mental identity. So in a relationship, in our everyday life, we create mental identities, we create views. So on that quote, right, we can see that the world is within us. The origination of the world is within us. The end of the world depends on us. If things are outside, external to us, we have no control. We cannot do anything about it. It is because things are within us. We can do something about it. It is within our mind. It is within our views, within our perception, right? That we can change the perception. So this is the basis of something which we have to understand first, so that we can work towards the end of suffering. If we understand that the problem is not outside, the problem occurs from our own fabrication of things, our own creation of things. We create our own happiness. We create our own enemies. We create our own friends. We create something which is fearful. We create something which is beautiful. So it is all our own creation. So when we know that, right, then we can learn not to create things that cause us suffering. There is an important aspect in Buddhism, an important discovery by the Buddha. And that discovery is that we do not really have a permanent self, a permanent soul. Now, this is something which is different from all other religions, you know. So this is something I will talk much later because it is a bit complicated. Like it involves more than one thing. There is a self which comes from dependent origination, and there is a self which comes from views, and a self that comes from perception, and there's a self that comes from consciousness. You know, this is something I will talk later. But it is important to know that we do not have the power, right? Power to think. We do not. We do not have the power to feel. If we have the power to feel, then we can feel great all the time, feel happy all the time. If we have the power to think, we can always think good thoughts. We don't have to worry. Right? It is precisely because we don't have that power. Where this feeling comes from, where this thought comes from. And there is a process. And that process is called dependent origination. Depending on contact with a mental identity, feeling arises. Depending on feeling, craving arises. And from there, you have your thoughts coming up. So that's the process. So that is something that we have to take into account. We have to see every time that feeling arises in us, or craving arises in us, or aversion arises, or whatever emotions that arise in us, we know we must have been in contact with a mental identity, the object of that mental identity. As soon as we somebody we don't like, hate arises, no aversion arises. As soon as we see somebody we like, there's a feeling of attraction, right? So it's natural. So it's the mental identity that creates that, right? So the problem lies with the mental identity that we have created. The problem lies with the views that we have created as well. So knowing all this innate Dhamma that arises in us in terms of feeling, in terms of thoughts, in terms of views, right? We can find out the causes, how we fabricate a mental identity to create aversion, how our views, create problems. All this that we have created is not sure. It's not sure how true it is, right? Because we can only create with whatever information that we have. We create these things, whether it's views or mental identities, dependent on our conditioning. Depending means our conditioning is where we were born, in what family, what social class, what books we have read, what influence other people have on us. So all these conditions, are the result, are the causes of creating our views and our mental identities. So different people with different conditionings will create different mental identities and different views. And all of them are not sure to be right. We cannot be sure that the views that we have is right because we do not know the conditioning, our own conditioning that creates this view, that creates this mental identity. So when we take our views and mental identities as not sure, then we do not hold on to them tightly. When we don't hold on to them tightly, then we do not quarrel with people. We don't have this righteousness, right? Then we can accept other people's views as well. The thing about not sure is that It is empty of what's right and what's wrong. It is empty of what's good and what's bad. It's empty of what's beautiful and what's ugly. So when we say not sure, we are not holding on to a position. And that's the beauty of it. When we don't hold on to the position, we cannot continue an argument, or somebody else cannot continue arguing with us. Our own mind cannot continue arguing with ourselves, because you can't argue with something which is not sure. It is impossible to argue with something that is uncertain at all, which has no standpoint. So these are the important things. This is the way, this is the Dhamma that we have to hold on to. Not sure is made out of uncertainty, and it is also made up of emptiness, empty of what's right and wrong. See? Empty of what's good and bad. See? Those two things, those are two important things. Uncertainty because things changes all the time. So when you have read a little bit about Buddhism and everything, the practice comes in awareness of your feelings, awareness of your perceptions, your mental identity of people, awareness of your thoughts, not thinking, your thoughts, awareness of your views, right? Your views of yourself, your views of others, views on how things should be going, views on things how things should be done, right? Or even views on just things. So the practice lies in this. So in order for us to be able to see these things clearly, when they are there, that's the first thing. When we are holding on to a view, we want to know, we want to be aware that we are doing that. And we can only do that by having a mind which is developed enough to have this awareness or have this mindfulness. So in our practice, there are three important things that we have. First is keeping the precept, moral precepts, 5 precepts. The whole idea of abstaining from killing, stealing, lying, sexual misconduct, and getting drunk is so that we don't have problems. As simple as that. We don't have guilt. We don't face the consequences of those actions. So we keep it so our mind is happy. And the second part, when our mind is happy with keeping our precept, then we can practice meditation. So the whole purpose of practicing meditation is to develop concentration and mindfulness, nothing else. Not seeing heaven, not going to hell, right? Not developing psychic powers. It is developing concentration and mindfulness. Mindfulness so we can watch our mind. What is it holding on? Is it holding on to a feeling of anger? Is it holding on to the feeling of jealousy? Or is it holding on this view of themselves, of a view of other people? So that's where we have to watch out. These are the things that are causing us problems. So we must have a mind that is powerful enough to see our mind. Right? So that's the path. Mind seeing mind. Right? Or mind seeing the mind and the heart. Right? So we cannot get far in our practice if we do not develop our mind. Without a powerful mind, we cannot be aware, of this Dhamma that arises in this views that arise in us, these feelings that arise. Okay, so the first part and most important part is keeping the precepts, and after that, practicing meditation, concentration, improve the concentration and mindfulness. And then when you have a developed mind, then by understanding what you have to do, that simple process, continually observing your mind, witnessing what your mind is doing, where you can see the things, the feeling that arises, then you can find out what the cause, what the mental identity that causes this feeling. Why does this feeling arises? What mental identity have I created to create these feelings of jealousy or this feeling of hate or aversion? Okay, so I'm going to stop here now. Okay, so I'll give a short chanting, just short blessing, before we finish. Bhavatu sabba mangalang rakhantu sabba devata sabba bhutanu bhavena satha soti bhavantu te bhavatu sabba mangalang rakhantu sabba devata sabba dhammanu bhavena satha soti bhavantu te Bhavatu sabba mangalang rakhantu sabba devata sabba sanghanu Pavena Satasoti Pawantu Te. Okay, good night, everybody, then.
Thank you, Tanajan.
Okay.